from Rafah. Many have been killed. Most of them have gone to Al-Mawasi, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Al-Mawasi because I've been there a lot. I spent 2 weeks living there over Christmas and New Year. And Al-Mawasi consists of a beach, a road, and a lot of wasteland. There are no resources there at all. There's no running water. There's no electricity. There's no electricity anywhere in Gaza, but there was no electricity there before. There are no resources whatsoever. When I was there over Christmas and New Year, it was empty. When I went back a few weeks ago, it was absolutely packed with hundreds, and I mean hundreds of thousands of people in tents. I call them tents, but they're not really tents. They're makeshift shelters made of tarpaulin, made of plastic. Hundreds of thousands of people there. It was packed. And now, another million is going in there. There is no room for them. There is no hospital near there at all. Rafah is a small town. It had over 1.5 million living there recently. It was designed for about 150, 200,000. There are 2 hospitals in Rafah. Al-Najah Hospital, which normally has 60 beds, and the Kuwaiti Hospital, which you may have heard about this last couple of weeks. The Kuwaiti Hospital normally has got 15 beds. There are some field hospitals there. There's the European Gaza Hospital, which is very difficult to get to because it's surrounded by the Israeli Defense Force ground forces. So there are well over 1 million people now who have either zero or extremely difficult access to any medical care. I'm going to tell you about Eslam, who is still living in Rafah. She's a very good friend of mine. She's an operating theatre nurse. A year ago, almost to the day, I was working with her in the operating theatres of the European Hospital in Gaza, carrying out surgery. She and her husband have been displaced 6 times and are now in Rafah. In November, very beginning of November, her house in northern Gaza was bombed. They couldn't find her father after that. About 4 or 5 weeks later, they went back to the house to try and find some of their belongings, and they found her father buried under the rubble. 5 weeks he'd lain there, dead. About 8 weeks ago, her brother, Hazam, who was working in Al-Nasser Hospital, in the Nasser Medical Complex, was working in the operating theatres. And a quadcopter, you know about quadcopters, we heard Hassan Abu Sitta talk about them a couple of weeks ago. A quadcopter went into the hospital and shot him. He survived, but he was shot in the chest, had to have emergency surgery. So I speak to Eslam regularly. I saw her when I was out there a few weeks ago, and I spoke to her 2 days ago, and I asked her, what do you want me to say to people in England? And I said, are you going to move? She said, I'm staying here. My husband and I are staying here. We're the only people who've stayed in our neighbourhood. I don't know where to go. Nowhere is safe. Al-Mawasi has just been bombed. I think I will die in my home. It's better for me. And I asked her to describe yesterday what she's seen. And this is what she said to me. And it's not very nice. Children without heads and completely charred bodies. The place designated for many hundreds of thousands of displaced people, Al-Mawasi, has been bombed by missiles. The fire consumed the bodies of the displaced and left them in pieces everywhere. The families were sleeping and were directly targeted. She asked me to ask this question, not of you, but of our Western governments. What are you waiting for to stand side by side with Gaza? And her final comment was that God does not bless weakness. I couldn't get hold of her this morning. On the WhatsApp message, there's still only 1 tick, so I don't know whether she's alive or not. I hope she is. We've heard from Hanan about the healthcare workers who have been killed, and we also know many of them have been abducted as well. And at the last vigil, I told you briefly about two people I met a few weeks ago, and I've been in contact with them, and they asked if I would tell their brief stories again. So forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I'm going to tell you very briefly about Haitham and Sari. Sari is a young operating theatre nurse who I spent 2 weeks with every day operating just a few weeks ago. Haitham is a young doctor who I'd met previously. They were both abducted by the Israeli Defence Force, one of them at Nasser Medical Complex and one of them at the Indonesian hospital. Sari was abducted for 62 days, Haitham for 42 days, and they described me, and they gave me very, very similar stories of what had happened to them. They were both stripped naked, they were both blindfolded and handcuffed with their hands behind their back for every single hour of their captivity. One of them for 42 days, one of them for 65 days. For the first few days they were given no water and no food. For every single day of that captivity they were beaten. Every single day, some days for 12 hours non-stop. They were not allowed to lie down for the whole of that captivity. They were either forced to sit or to stay on their knees. And if any of them did lie down, every single prisoner there was punished by being placed on their knees and beaten for 24 hours. Now there are many, many more like that. Sari, the young nurse, now dislocates his shoulders several times a day because his arms were forced back so badly with the handcuffs that his joints became very loose and he now cannot function properly because of his shoulders. Haitham took off his top and his trousers and showed me the multiple scars and the healing ulcers he's got from all the beatings he had. There are many, many other people like them, but they've asked me to repeat the stories again and again so that everyone knows what is going on. I'm going to finish up by telling you just very briefly about Al-Aqsa Hospital, and it's very appropriate we're here today at the student encampment. 5 weeks ago, almost to the day, when I was at Al-Aqsa Hospital, we were living in the hospital, and when it was quiet, which wasn't very often, but we wandered around the grounds with the displaced people who were living there, and there were about 15 to 20,000 people living in the hospital or the close environment. And they held a vigil. The displaced people, the refugees, the patients, and many, many orphans held a vigil in honor of the students around the world who were protesting on their behalf. I've taken videos of it, I've got photos of it. They'd made up a lot of posters supporting the students at Columbia. And it was wonderful to see these people who have been devastated by the events of the last 7 months paying tribute and cheering the students around the world. So I'd like to finish by paying my tribute, all of our tributes, to the wonderful students in Oxford, around the country, around the world, and we must carry on supporting them. Thank you very much indeed.